wars and misunderstandings between cultures, and see what is the agency, what is that power that we have to do that. We live at the time where cultural heritage is specifically targeted, and you in the region are experiencing really a significant and rapid loss of cultural heritage being targeted purposely for the sake of revising history, reframing identity of territories. From my own experience, coming from Sarajevo, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have 20 years ago witnessed the genocide and the war, where also culture was targeted not just as a collateral damage of the war, but really for the purpose of destroying coexistence and destroying memory of people who once lived there together. At the same time, people in Bosnia, and I can imagine also in Syria, Iraq, and other places, counter conflicts like this with cultural tools as well. In this case, you see here an image of a cello player playing in the ruin, you know, just for the purpose of defiance, expressing protest against what was happening to the city being under siege for 3.5 years, and countering that destruction with something constructive and beautiful, such as music, playing in the ruin. Other people have been risking their lives to go to an art exhibition to design an object to show things on the street. One of also my own family members was targeted in such an exhibition and died on the street of Sarajevo during an art exhibition. But doing art and design and architecture meant that one is human, one is different from those who attack one. And I think there's really a power to that, that we designers and artists need to recognize, and if we are to engage in what is happening in the world. So I would like to go through 4 points where I think culture can be really a powerful tool in conflicts. First, by providing evidence of existence and coexistence. I will show you some examples from my own academic research, which was about Bosnia's memory and war. It is a country where 3 major religious and ethnic groups lived together for centuries: Christians, Catholics and Orthodox Christians, Jews and Muslims. In every little town and village you have a situation like this, where major church, mosque and Catholic church are standing literally next to one another. It was then the embodiment of that coexistence found its place in architecture, where religious buildings that are standing next to each other, they are witness to the fact that people have managed to live with each other as neighbors. And precisely because of that quality as evidence, culture is targeted in wars. In our war, it was monuments such as bridges, libraries, archives, cemeteries, religious buildings were specifically targeted. Here, an example from the old bridge in Mostar, a pearl of the Ottoman architecture from 16th century, shot not as a collateral damage, but by a tank to physically divide the Catholic and the Muslim parts of the city. Here you see a slide of the burning library of Sarajevo University Library. 300,000 books and rare manuscripts and codices burned to ashes in one day. When the people started building human chains to rescue the books burning in the library, snipers were shooting at them to prevent the firefighting operations. So it was really an attempt to erase that knowledge, but also Ottoman archives that were housed in the library that could prove people's claims to land from the 19th century, who lived where and what did people own. So this was what one scholar, Andras Riedlmayer, called the largest single book burning incident in the modern history. Religious buildings were also specifically targeted because they are the most poignant evidence of one ethnic group's existence in a certain territory. Over 3,000 religious buildings were destroyed in Bosnia to complete or heavy extent. Each ethnic group suffered significant losses, but it was the Bosnian Muslims who took on the hardest damage, both in human terms and in terms of loss of their cultural heritage. And the destruction went hand in hand with erasure of people. You know, people were put in prisons, in concentration camps, women were raped. At the same time, their religious buildings, graveyards were also targeted. Partly together, people were executed in front of their mosques. This is what I researched and tried to prove, that this destruction was deliberate and systematic. Here you see an example from an eastern Bosnian town, Foča, which all of the mosques in the town have been erased. And the destruction went always in a similar pattern. So a building would be bombed and then burned. Then a bulldozer will come, remove all the material. Even the foundation stones were dug out. Graveyards were dug out to literally deroot the community and erase the traces that this specific ethnic group has ever lived in the territory. After all the mosques have been wiped out, the city was renamed Srbinje, meaning the Serb town, indicating that no other ethnic group now is living there. And the process of coming back is now really difficult for people who have been kicked out. This mosque still hasn't been restored, and foundation stones of it have been found together with bones of the in a mass grave. I'm sorry I'm starting with something heavy like this, but we are getting to a more hopeful parts. So this is a project that I did then in response, on the one hand, using art and design and crafts to counter this, to document this erasure, but also take the voice of the people, like analphabet women who were raped, to criminal tribunal in The Hague to show what is happening there. So this is a project called Monument in Waiting. It's a carpet that looks like a traditional Bosnian carpet with this red pattern. It's typical of these flat woven kilims. But the pattern has been slightly changed, as you see here, these patterns that are surrounding the main motif. They look like weapons, so grenades, mines, there's a barbed wire for concentration camps. And the pattern I designed in conversation with the weavers. This is inspired by so-called trench art that happens in war. On the one hand, Afghan war rags, after decades of violence in Afghanistan, people have started changing the traditional patterns into these war patterns, because textiles are means of writing and documenting history. And so here you see Kalashnikov and also the tanks and mines being part of that carpet landscape. But also this is something that goes back to the Great War, First World War, when soldiers in this moment of existential minimum, when you are sitting in the trench and bombs are shooting over your head, what do? You transform that moment into something constructive, and people started producing these beautiful flower vases out of the garbage and shells that they found there. And people in Sarajevo have been doing the same out of the 3 million grenades that were fired on the city. Here, this carpet is also a way of, it's a coded pattern that documents destruction of, in this case, 9 mosques that were destroyed during the war. You see this central motif, tree of life. Each of the branches tells a story of one mosque and is coded with information, whether it's strong destruction and the way it's been restored, like exactly how it looked before or with some changes. You see how this, like if it's colored white, it means yes. If it's colored no color, it's no. So there is a video and a booklet that explains the code, how you can read further information about this project. But also there is a large archive that of 4,000 photographs and also data produced within my research that's linked to this carpet that I did in field work, but also building on the research of my one of my PhD advisors, Andras Riedelmeier, who worked for the Criminal Tribunal in The Hague to produce this evidence that destruction was part of an instrumental tool of genocide. And some of the stories you see at the end of the carpet, I don't know if it's visible, at the end of these branches are birds. Birds in traditional carpet iconography represent stories. They are also carriers of souls from this world to the world after. In this case, you know, these birds are abstracted stories of what people were telling, what's like oral history from the villages. So here, village of Ahmetci, where the whole village has been killed, 116 people in one day. After the destruction, they separated into two jamaats because over the conflict of how to restore and how to deal with this memory, whether to rebuild exactly how it was or you know, pretend as if nothing happened. And so the village split in two, and there's a bird, two birds in the same nest type of symbol. Here is a bird that has a pig nose in its feet, symbolizing the process, difficult process of returning home. In Zvornik, Eastern Bosnia, when people, you know, came back and wanted to restore the mosque, someone put a slaughtered pig into the foundation stones of the mosque to humiliate the site and indicate that people are not welcome there. And the whole carpet then, once the pattern has been designed, was woven by women who survived the camps. So the making process was also something that's part of the recovery. At the end, this was exhibited in The Hague, and I invited the judges and lawyers from the Criminal Tribunal to symbolically launch this process of healing, and by attaching prayer beads that I collected in the mosques that I visited, kneeling down in front of it and kind of attaching the prayer beads to the monument. The whole thing is left open on the top to indicate that the process of documenting and healing is a never-ending one, and that more stories need to be told. Now, another point is promoting pluralism by looking at the fluidity of identity and also cultural mobility. Specifically, I'm working in the context of conflicts over identities, Islamic identity, identity of many migrants in the West, that is often expressed on the body of the woman through these veiling debates. Recently, we are witnessing again the discussion and prohibition of the so-called burqa dilemma in France, Germany, Austria, but also discussions and protests against mosques every time people want to build one. And these debates are really about xenophobia and racism, but are packaged in design arguments and architectural arguments. Contemporary architecture is a vehicle to carry out these discussions. Right now, we are stuck in this debate between how to build. You know, communities are usually favoring this kind of nostalgic type of model to import that memory of their homeland into the new context without any changes, and people call them nostalgia mosques, versus this kind of white cube model that is kind of more recognized as contemporary architecture, but fails to provide a sense of identity for the communities. For me, this debate is really reductive in terms of architecture that kind of reduces the formal diversity and possibilities of architecture to just these two types, where really we need to talk about politics. So I went to the core of the problem to research what is the mosque and what is the what are the formal and historical definitions of it. And in my study, I saw that there is a tremendous variety of mosques. There is no formal consistency as Islam was spreading from one region to another. Islamic architecture was always in dialogue with pre-existing cultures and incorporated these, added new elements to it. So, we cannot really talk about pure Islamic architecture. What is that? It is a concept that was invented by Western architecture and art historians. So what truly is the nature of so-called Islamic architecture is this dialogical dimension, embracing and working with local cultural traditions. So based on this study of history, I developed a little theory of mosque, defining the mosque in conceptual and not formal terms, saying that, when you look at this image, a mosque can be a temporary space that happens as you worship in public space. People congregate, they orient their bodies towards Mecca, so directionality is one principle. Purity and cleanliness, the surface needs to be ritually and physically clean. The minimal volume would be the volume of the human body, which is also a Quranic concept. And then there's programmatic variability. As long as you pray, you transform this street into a mosque. When you stop praying, it's not a mosque anymore. And finally, intemporality, that mosque can be temporarily occupied by worship, but also other things can take place. So I'm combining this theory with also the agenda to empower communities that in the West have been marginalized, specifically Muslim women who recognized through the hijab are often victims to violence and racism, so they withdraw from the public arena. So I just wanted to design this kind of tool that would be a kind of question, not necessarily solution to this problem, but more in a kind of design tool to question what is the mosque, how do we think about the form, and how do we express identity of those who belong to different cultural milieus. So I designed something like these wearable mosques, and the idea is you have some form of Islamic clothing that unfolds, has a prayer rug attached to it, and the indication of the prayer direction. And it could be transformed into other useful objects. So you would have this mosque that you can unfold the front part, it becomes your prayer rug. But because mosques are social spaces, you can unfold the back, so the next person can pray behind you or alongside you. This was just the system, but it was still a uniform. It didn't talk about the personal, the individual identity. So then I went to push it further and created this chic kind of Western suit for a businesswoman, where you have a hybridized pants and skirt. You can unfold it, and a little prayer rug flips out, and you unfold it further so a next person can pray next alongside you. And I exhibit this, it's a kind of communication device. I go into communities and talk with people, and we can engage in discussions around the dress. But they're also exhibited as posters, as a kind of calligraphy on human scale. They're person-specific, site-specific objects of design, and showing really that the Muslim woman should not be just recognized for her religiosity, but she may have a kind of professional identity and a kind of age identity also. And there are different constellations of this in different locations. This was in Austria, in a little village of St. Wolfgang where I worked. I created a Dirndl moschee derived from the traditional Austrian costumes and inspired by the local Catholic Renaissance altar that unfolds into 3 pieces, just like the prayer rug here, that is the apron, unfolds and becomes a prayer space for 3 people. And there are little funny elements here, like the traditional scarf that women in Austria wear on the shoulders. When you put it as a hijab, the decoration, it hides the hair but makes new hair by transforming this. The third dimension that where design can be a tool for countering conflicts between cultures evokes transcultural aesthetics and mobility of culture, as exemplified in this Islamic cemetery Altach that was designed by Austrian architect Bernardo Bader, and I designed the prayer space in this cemetery. It is the first cemetery for Muslim immigrants in this region. Up to this point, there was, people used to ship their dead back to Turkey, Chechnya, Bosnia, which was very expensive and complicated process. And it had to do with the conception of people that, you bury your dead where you came from, because Austria is not your homeland and you actually want to go back. So here it was very unique that the community decided, no, this is our homeland now. We want to stay here. We want to bury our dead here. So how do we do that? It was not legally possible to do it according to Islamic traditions. So a new law had to be invented. A new aesthetic had to be invented to also signal that shift in society, that homeland is not anymore where you came from, but where you want to stay after you die. So in my design for this prayer space, I worked with locally specific architecture, the shingles. They use a lot of wood architecture, these shingles, in covering their facades. And I directed them towards Mecca. The reference here you see on the what is this, left side for you. This is the traditional architecture in that region, the wooden shingles. And then I really like this. This is from the Grand National Assembly Mosque in Turkey, where the mihrab has been designed as pure light. So it's one of the names of God coming as light, and light being staged in the prayer space where people are literally bathing in light. And this curtain Qibla wall does that by breaking the light, staging it really, and creating an animated spatial experience when you go in. This curtain is almost like moving because you are moving. When you stand still and you look towards Mecca, you can see through the window to the garden, to the world after, symbolically. This project received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture in 2012. And it received it really for the reason of providing this new aesthetic for the community and providing this space where a convergence between cultures can happen. On another dimension, beyond design, I also curate and organize events with different communities. So this was at MIT last year. The symposium called Culture Runners that I organized together with a group, Edge of Arabia, group that works with artists from the Middle East. We rented carpets from a local shop and invited people, 30 artists from Middle East and also local scientists and artists, to share stories and really provide encounter, and also share their technologies for communication across borders. In this project, we used this Culture Runners RV, an American RV, that we refurbished to become a mobile artist studio. Here you see some of the group members. And then in the symposium, there were different things happening. For example, here you could drink tea with the curator in Tehran through a human avatar, which was one of our students. So he could hear you through the phone, but you could not hear him. She had to enact him. So there was this using the technology, but also the human aspect that to channel the communication through people. There were also technologies, of course, at MIT. People make these awesome things. So Orkan Telhan, a designer from Media Lab, produced these discursive Quran, Bible, Torah readers that you open one holy text and it gives you texts from the other holy texts, and you can kind of comparatively read them. And then there was storytelling. Within this, I produced a project that created the identity for the whole group, which I would like to show you.
Rendezvous is a growing cultural fabric designed to map the identities, migration, and cultural encounters of its participants. This wearable quilt features textiles from Islamic cultures and local sites in the United States. Hexagons and stars of the quilt can be transformed into individual letterman's jackets and vice versa. The jackets unzip flat into geometric elements that form the larger quilt. Rendezvous began with cultural runners, an artistic expedition in search of empathy between cultures. This expedition takes shape through journeys of artists in an American RV, modified with artworks and broadcast technologies to function as a vehicle for intercultural communication. At the heart of this expedition is the development of new cultural technologies. For example, wearable and portable communication devices such as Rendezvous that can connect communities across contested cultural territories, especially the Middle East and the United States. Rendezvous. The project name is a hybrid of the words yarn and rendezvous. Yarn refers to a thread used for making fabrics and to storytelling. Yarn can also mean an exciting story. Rendezvous refers to a place for a meeting or a romance. Rendezvous is meant to connect people and their stories through their cultural patterns, symbols, and textiles. Through Rendezvous, people can discover stories that they share and communicate unofficial, interconnected histories. In the fall of 2014, the Culture Runner Symposium at MIT asked participating artists to bring textiles from the places of their residence, which were then combined with textiles from Boston. The first phase of the project encompasses 12 jackets completed with these hybrid textiles. The project is in the state of an ongoing transformation and customization. Some jackets may be further transformed into variations on tunics, kaftans, abayas, dresses, and shirts inspired from East and West. Over time, as more and more textiles are collected from project participants, the Rendezvous will change its color and patterns, becoming a map of the growing Culture Runners community.
I like this song. So you see here, this was a kind of, it's a piece of clothing. You can sell it as a piece of clothing, but it's also an artwork that is performative. We used it as this kind of flag of the community. You stuck your head through, and then we would unzip it and dress the whole group with it. And then our bus was in this crazy, like winter storm at the Armory show in New York, which is one of the largest commercial art events in the United States. And we would house there, and like rich and poor people and artsy and non-artsy people would come in, and it was very diverse groups. I mean, ranging from the Saudi ambassador to the United Nations to the cultural commissioner of US, and people would come into the RV and hang out there and get the tea and talk to each other. And this weird situation just provokes really interesting conversations and also encounters. So this thing is still traveling across US. And then finally, I want to show you the Memory Matrix project that is exhibited here, and we had 2 days of workshops producing new stories and new pixels of it. This project is about preservation of memory at the time of war. What you see here began with the destruction of the Arch of Palmyra, the Arch of Triumph that was destroyed last year by ISIS. And it was really quite a powerful event that used images and the kind of power of images to create a spectacle of violence across the world. And the world reacted, really playing into the hands of ISIS and creating also more value for further looting and destruction of heritage in Syria. So I wanted to raise awareness about this problem, not only what is happening in Syria, when Palmyra was targeted, everyone screamed, but Aleppo has been targeted also for many months before that, and also no one was really paying attention. Using the moment of why do we care for Palmyra and not for Aleppo is also about empathy. So, trying to find ways in which you can create a link that people start to care by introducing their own story into the game. So I proposed for the MIT 100th anniversary of our campus to create an installation in the building where I work. This is the media lab, and this is our Arch of Triumph. These are the architectural features of the building saying MIT, and you see it from both sides of the building as you walk. And the idea was to have this screen, a kind of digital physical image, referring to the fact that most of these lost monuments are now only existing in the digital realm, in the digital form. And then making that experience of the digital physical. So the image became this kind of scaffolding, a stage for thinking, for crossing and encountering, and for conversation and reflection on what did we actually lose and how do we preserve them. When you zoom into the structure, there are 20,000 pixels made of plexiglass, and they are laser cut with outlines of buildings that were destroyed. So you take a building and then what was erased becomes an outline, a hole into the pixel, symbolizing the literal absence of the monument in landscape. This is approximate size of these 5 by 5 centimeters. They fit into a hand. They are symbolic keychains representing the people behind that heritage. All these refugees who now, have lost not only their heritage but also their homes. And these pixels are hanging from the fence to create also a kind of animated display. That is, the idea is that when wind blows through it, the whole image starts to shake. The image is also animated through light and a kind of anamorphic projection. So we designed it so that when you look straight to it, that's the only time you actually see the arch in its full scale. And it's lit with blue light to really take out the color and this digital effect. When you turn the light green, the image kind of disappears. When you're working through it, sometimes it looks two-dimensional, almost like it's one flat surface, but it's not. It is made of several layers of these fences, and you can walk through them, as in this image. And the idea with that is that you can kind of transgress and enter a space, not just, you're not standing in front of a wall. The materials used are symbolic. The chain link fence is specifically used as a reference to the borders erected, between cultures, against refugees, between Israelis and Palestinians, you name it. It's quite a symbolic material. And then the material becomes a display. The border becomes a gate because you multiply it and people go in it and they cross through it. The whole project is a solidarity building enterprise. There are groups of students and local partners with whom I developed this. The whole project in its large scale took 142 people worked on it, different student groups, different funders, crowdsourced funding from all over the world. Students in the making process, the hanging of these pixels was quite an effort. We had students from Montserrat College, Boston University, Wellesley College, MIT. So it was a really wonderful collaborative making. But also making was kind of staged as conceptually that to indicate that monuments are not finished. Things get destroyed, and this is a monument in a constant process of making and unmaking. So here are some slides of it, which is also evoked through the use of scaffolding as a carrying material. This is one shot looking from the side, but as you are walking through you always see these fragments of it, and you see how the pixels are actually patterned, so they overlay in depth, but they are, so you get this full image when you are looking straight to it. And just as in any kind of cultural heritage, you cannot prevent destruction, and you cannot preserve things forever. Destruction is inevitable. So here what happened is when wind would blow, it would turn these pixels, and at some point it would also kick them out. And it was very interesting learning process from the project. When too many of them were falling on the ground, people would just walk over them and destroy them, steal them, and so on. When we would clear them off and there would be one on the ground, someone would come and pick it up and put it nicely. So it was really also about negotiating with the audience the care and the taking care and responsibility for this thing that stands in public space. The pixels are designed in transcultural workshops as the project moves to different sites, but also I'm moving to different places. Like here we had 2 workshops yesterday and day before yesterday, where I invite participants to select one either artifact or heritage from their cultural context that either vanished during their lifetime or is threatened currently. So this was at MIT, Cairo Maker Fair. 10 days ago I was in Ramallah at the International Art Academy. There was another workshop. There's another workshop right now happening in Manila with my colleagues leading it. And then all these designs get digitized, vectorized, and attached to a link, a Bitcoin chain link that connects the information related to the story to transactions of Bitcoin, disseminating this data all across the deep web and making it, so to say, indestructible. This part is not yet fully developed in terms of how do you access that data back, but the idea is there to kind of use this digital realm and kind of perpetuate the information endlessly. And some of the stories told here are really touching. So here are some examples from MIT, a student whose family survived, or not all of them, the Holocaust. She designed the pixel based on the synagogue in Munich, where all of the synagogues were destroyed by Nazis in the Second World War. She wrote that it only takes a hatred of one man to uproot a community of thousands. And here is an example of a temple destroyed by earthquake, where the student who was actually researching in the region witnessed the destruction of this temple and what that meant for the whole community. So she's writing about the forces that are beyond our control, such as earthquake, and that make destruction of memory unavoidable. And then also other people are bringing in immaterial heritage, and symbolized here with a tree representing the Amazon forest, and the indigenous knowledge and all that culture that are produced by indigenous people that we are destroying just with our actions here that have repercussions in other parts of the world with our consumerism, so making us aware of that aspect. In the workshops, people, use these exercise sheets to design outlines. This is how this approximately look, and then we pick one with them and vectorized it based on it, and that gets laser cut. So here is the Aleppo Citadel from someone proposed in Cairo. Another example, the Titanic. I'm not sure here, is it the film of Titanic or the actual ship that the person is proposing, but it was also an interesting example of thinking of film as cultural heritage. And I like this example of someone talking about the Tutankhamun mask that fell to the ground when the experts were restoring it, and the beard fell off, and then they kind of glued it with super glue. And the student was questioning, does expertise really prevent destruction of heritage, or things also get destroyed in museums even if things are kind of preserved there. So now the cutout from the pixels becomes a piece of jewelry. So these are some shots from the workshop in Palestine, where we also bought locally some beads to create jewelry, and the idea here is, on the one hand, to create these embodiments of memory, so another person is wearing someone else's memory, to engage kids and communities, but also, what the students there were proposing, and that we either sell them to finance education of refugees, or here in the workshop it was brought up that we could also give them as a present to the kids in the refugee camp. So I'm not sure where this part will go, but these are some of the ideas floating in the mind, and you can see some of the jewelry exhibited in the space, in the maker space here. So all the designs that were produced here, and I would like to invite you also to create a design on your own, and you can attach it to the installation inside, will be laser cut and exhibited at the Kalandia International. This is Palestinian Biennale that's happening in October this year. Ultimately, the goal is that this project would bring also the voice of refugees in it, and benefit the education of these young people who have no perspective, as they are kind of trapped in the place where they have shelter, but what is really their future. And I would like to invite you also to be part of that process and help us along the way. And you can do that by participating in the design, or also in any other way that you would like. Thank you. If there are any questions, I would be happy to discuss. Yes. Do we need to record these questions, or do you want?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just want to go back to the bits before the memory matrix. There's a lot, the story you're telling, there's a lot of history involved, religion, human behavior, symbolism in so many ways. How, if you can walk us a little bit through your design process, and how these elements contribute to your projects, or even to the memory matrix. So how is it developed? How do you look at it? And what roles do they play in your design ideation?
Are you thinking of any specific project, or
no,
general?
Nothing specific, but I just wanted more on the process of design.
Okay. So the design process, it goes through many different iterations, but I kind of more or less took you also through the journey of how all the works have been building on each other. So I usually do a lot of research on, either the history of the place, or also the theory of whatever I'm dealing with. Like in the case of these mosques, for example, I have a decade of work that looks at, both historically and theoretically, on what is the mosque, how it has been defined legally, religiously, and historically, what are the debates in architecture and so on. Within that, I identified a problem. In this case, it was the problem of arguments for or against one or the other model, whereas there was no formal definition. There was a certain, historically speaking, elasticity in design. So that gave me then the idea to say, okay, we can actually embrace this elasticity and show it. So in the wearable pieces, for example, the first idea was that sketch, and I had a dream about it, after all this research, how do we show what is the minimal essence of it? And it's actually the human body. So the first iteration was that sketch that I showed of the wearable mask. And that one was, I took it as an idea, but it was not good. It was very kind of traditional looking. It didn't speak to a reality of how people clothe. And then I often have a lot of conversations either with my colleagues or at that time I think I was a graduate student, feedback from people, which was, why does it have to look that traditional? What would you wear? And then I went through a series of iterations. I built models, I built prototypes, I throw them away, I design new ones. So there is also kind of feedback from community. When I came up with the first one, which was this chic suit, I then went to the Muslim community at MIT to ask them what they think and would they wear them. And then in that interaction, it became very clear, well, no one would actually wear this as a, you can also just easily take a prayer rug and play. Like, it's not a usable object in that sense, although it's made to fully function as a useful object. The use of it is symbolic, which is speaking through the aesthetics that, like, could this be a mosque? Like theoretically it could. So I integrate that feedback. Of course, everyone would be uncomfortable also, like worshiping a sculpture. So I didn't go that route specifically because of that. So I exhibited as a piece of fashion, depending on the context, or as a kind of artwork with a series of photographs. So there is a lot of back and forth. When in the works with communities, it's like with Memory Matrix, it started with this photo montage, again based on research on what is heritage, how it's, why is it targeted, and so on. But then it was really about, okay, whose voice is, who am I, to propose this whole picture, and how do you bring communities in conversation? And there, at that point, students came in, so there was a lot of undergraduate, graduate students. Debates on, what materials to use. We decided this plexiglass went through a lot of iterations. First, I wanted to use this interrogation mirror, which comes from military technology. It's great in terms of it reflects on you. It's a mirror. You can see through from one side, and from the other you can't. But it's super expensive, so threw that out. Then another idea was to say, okay, let's take the DVDs as a material. Tried laser cutting that, toxic fumes, tried cutting it, started to chip off, and it looked like really ugly as a kind of, no one would wear that jewelry, so the aesthetic component was also really important. And then we decided on this one because it also has that glowing effect during the day and creates the digital effect. So it's always a mix between conceptual and the kind of visual. Does this answer your question? Yes. Just for the others to hear.
First of all, thank you so much. This was incredible. I saw the installation yesterday, but hearing you talk about it, I think it makes it more significant and powerful. I had one question, if you can talk a little bit more about the Kalendia International, because that's the first time I've heard of it. But then also I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how your Bosnian identity, or being from Bosnia, if that had a big role in the career and the path that you took, especially with the destruction of Sarajevo, but also just Bosnia in general.
Thank you. So Bosnia, yes. I mean, this has really shaped a lot of my, all of this work is motivated by Bosnia, because in our case, I grew up luckily in a very kind of multi-culti context, and I have learned to love and live that coexistence, and I'm very happy about it. I come from a Muslim family, but all of my friends, I mean, they come from all different backgrounds from there. And then suddenly, you live through experience of someone leaving the wife or husband to go to the mountain and shoot on their own city. How is that possible? So on the one hand, I was studying architecture and I wanted to do like buildings. On the other hand, there was this, pressing question of, I mean, it shapes you. Just war is the worst thing that can happen to community, because it's not a disaster on your own level. Everyone is affected. Your entire universe collapses. So it's really a terrible thing that happens. That's why, what's happening now in Syria and Iraq is just devastating. So for me, I just wanted to understand, how is it possible that ideology of nationalism would be so much more powerful than your own personal belief and experience? Like, you lived with this wife for 20 years. She's not a terrorist, How do you buy into this? And that's why I started to do my PhD, but also to give back something. The fact that I survived this war and went to all these elite schools, I think had a point, to use that privilege to put it to use in some way. So one thing to do it is through education of next generation and makes them more sensible to problems of cultures rather than their own. But the other is to actually intervene in these, and there are ways in which really art and design can do much more meaningful work than just humanitarian architecture, for example, because people have also cultural and emotional needs. And to Kalandia, so I was in Palestine before, 10 years ago, and it looked very different. Now I have some collaboration with the International Art Academy there, wonderful also group from all over. And together with them and also RIWAC, this is a heritage organization, they do super innovative work with communities, but also with architecture and historic preservation. We sat together and decided what this is going to be, and it will be a monument that reflects on a kind of something else that is usually talked about in Palestine, which is also like stones or bound to the kind of stone architecture. So this is the remain standing antenna. Next to it was the second largest antenna in the Arab world that was destroyed in 2004. No one knows much about it, but it was a really important and a significant landmark in the skyline of the city of Ramallah. And it was also a symbol of connectivity of Palestinians across territories that they cannot cross, from Gaza to West Bank to Jerusalem, but also culture, like radio culture. People grew up listening to radio and stories. But it links symbolically to political propaganda as well. So it's quite a poignant thing. And I noticed also when I was now in Ramallah that there were less of these Eiffel Towers that you also have here in Amman. I saw a lot of them, so I'm really excited about those. But it's interesting piece of kind of transnational heritage, where an icon from Paris, symbol of engineering that was never meant to be a monument, has become such a symbolic marker here in the region, and is now disappearing because the technology is becoming obsolete because everyone has satellite TV. So we are constructing something that will look like Eiffel Tower, but you will be lying on the ground looking at the stars. Pixels will be hanging from the Eiffel Tower, and you will be listening to, in this kind of view, you'll be listening to stories about the antenna that students now, they are recording like a podcast from, and these are some shots from jewelry making there. So this is to be done there. I really love this landmark, and I think it's going to be, you know, a nice and interesting project. So.
Thank you for this presentation. I have a question about materials. So the fashion industry and the design industry are moving more towards a sustainable, more eco-friendly environmental solution to creating things and not harming the environment as much. They're making jackets out of mushrooms and whatnot. Are you going to head into that direction anytime, or is it in your agenda?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a great question. I haven't done it yet, but it is on the agenda. So a project that I'm developing right now, okay, 5 minutes, is to work with the refugees here and also on using recyclable materials. So using garbage in the refugee camps to transform it into textiles that then people can weave and use in the camp to create different types of, you know, useful textiles, like against wind or visual barriers, fences, and also, you know, like interior maybe. I don't have experience with it, and, you know, I want to learn more before I will test it this semester with my students, because a lot of the recycling materials, they just look like recycling materials, and the key will be to make it look beautiful, you know. So I want to explore that part, because otherwise it's not gonna, then we can also just use these cheap blankets that they have anyway. They are maybe more useful. So the way it's going to have a visual, emotional impact is, I think it really brings color and something beautiful also to the camp. So it's the hope, and if you are working in this realm, please talk to me. I want to learn more how to do that better. Okay. If there are any pressing questions, we can take one more. Otherwise, I would say thank you and, how do you say, halas. Thanks.